You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guest about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. Usually introductions from my guest on CX Passport are easy to write. I started out with a goal for this podcast of interesting conversations with interesting people. When that's in place, the intro usually writes itself. So why did I struggle with the intro for today's guest? I simply didn't know where to start. Our guest today, Andre Wiringa, founder of Start Reverse, has been an ongoing source of customer experience inspiration and really just human inspiration for me since we met a few years ago. Where do I start? Want to learn more about experience design? Andre. Want to learn more about using the customer's experience as the starting point for your company's blueprint? Andre. Want to know about a completely different way to source talent? Andre. Want to walk a leadership team through an exercise unlike any other in helping them determine their mission, and sometimes on the side, their personal mission? Andre. Oh, and you want to find out that your transportation for a dinner amongst business colleagues wouldn't be a van, but would be a beautiful 10-kilometer evening bike ride in the Dutch countryside? Yeah, that's Andre. Andre educates and inspires me, and I know he will do the same for you on today's episode. Andre, welcome to CX Passport.
Thank you so much, Rick, for the invitation, and happy to be here. Super cool. I love the intro.
Brother, it is 100% sincere. Those memories and those realities are so true. But in fact, let's kind of start with this. Let's start with the beginning, or rather the end. Start Reverse. It's an interesting company name indeed. Tell me what you mean by Start Reverse.
What I really mean is, since 2000, we're really convinced you need to start with context. Context is decisive for everything. So when I talk about context, I mean purpose, I mean identity, I mean intended experience. And I mean, many companies really think that transformation, for instance, is derived from getting the process right, getting the content right. But you really need to start with context first, hence reverse.
Yeah, and that context, that experience, one of the things that I really valued that you helped kind of shape my thinking and the thinking of the client that we worked together on a few years ago was really thinking about the customer's experience and starting with what that experience looks like. So when you say context, how does that weave together with when you're thinking of what the customer's experience looks like?
Yeah, and I mean, starting reverse again is the opposite of traditional thinking. And traditional thinkers would start with getting the product right, the services right, make a logistical process, optimizing maybe the whole process part. And then through management, you get a certain working climate. The working climate leads to a certain staff behavior. And the end result would be customer experience. And we think that's the wrong way around. Once you know what the purpose is of your company and you link it to how you want to be experienced, then that's where you should start. If that's the intended experience, then what behavior, what interaction, be it online, be it offline, doesn't really matter. So what interaction leads to those experiences? And once you nail that, then you can say, so what culture and leadership would help shape that behavior? To then look at, so what do we need to change in our processes? So the whole process thinking, and I heard you say it in the intro, again is reverse. It's not process is leading. Yes, process is foundational, but the process design should be the result of thinking from context to delight, customer delight, to competency, and only then land at, so what do we need to do in our processes to optimize, let's say, the interactions we want to have?
I like, well, and you know that I like that. That's why I wanted to have this conversation with you. I think that approach is so fundamental. And what's interesting, and I've had this conversation with guests before, is that it's not necessarily hard. It's just, or it's not complex. It's just not easy is really what I'm going to say. That starting from that direction, for some reason, that should be the way we've done it from the beginning. And yet we started from process. Who knows, maybe it's our industrial revolution background, but this idea of now thinking of the context and thinking of the customer driving our direction forward. Something that to me is similar in that regard is we've spent a lot of time, especially over the last couple of years, through the pandemic, talking about customer experience, and especially a lot of discussions centers around digital. And that's not bad. I think of some of the digital experiences that I have about booking a table at a restaurant, or some of the contactless ways that I'm able to engage with a hospitality brand. That's good. And so digital is important, but I feel like we're often ignoring the human customer experience. So you, with this start reverse and just in general, your approach to humanity, how do you bring the human back to CX?
Well, I think the human, even if you talk about digitization, the human element is still important. I mean, do you digitize everything so you are more efficient, or do you bring in digital transformation so you can have more human interaction? And one example, I think we visited that Citizen M hotels in the Netherlands started about 10 years ago with self-check-in, which was a fun concept. Yeah? So you have these self-check-in kiosks. And then you could say, okay, then we don't need reception people anymore at all.
Right.
Or you could say, hey, but that takes away all the, let's say, the slack, the boring part. Like, this is your first visit to the hotel. A restaurant is open till 10:30. Would you like us to book a table? Breakfast is from 6 o'clock. I mean, it's just all blah, blah. Your room is on the 7th floor. I mean, forget all that. But if you have, let's say, those tasks replaced by digital, and you win more time to have this human interaction, I think that's where you can have the cake and eat it too. You have both efficiency, you forget about, so you go beyond the boring part, which is done, let's say, by the guest or by the customer himself, and you win more time for what really matters. So find out, who is your customer really, and how can I really delight during the interaction that we have. And you know, Rick, we focus mainly on those clients that operate in an environment where production and consumption of experience are simultaneous.
Okay.
Which is, I think it's the cool part. If it's retail, if it's flying, like airlines, airports, if it's automotive, if it's hospitality, the moment you consume your experience, it's being produced, which is, I mean, bloody hard to make it consistently memorable.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, that's what you can wake me up for. Then I get excited.
Well, and so that triggers kind of the next thought. So I kind of like the way you said that the experience of, or the consumption of the experience happens at the exact moment that the experience is produced. It reminds me of something a former guest, Alec Dalton of Marriott, talked about, that an experience is almost co-created between the brand, the company, and the customer. And thinking of it, obviously, from a hospitality lens with the Marriott lens. And it is that idea of, hey, I'm producing this experience, and the customer, the guest, the client is consuming it at exactly that moment. Now, that takes a special kind of human to be able to produce that experience live, a special kind of human to understand in a very quick way, be empathetic, to be understanding, to be curious, to be fun, to be engaging. And so you have taken, I've experienced just a piece of it, a completely novel approach to talent acquisition. You call it casting. I would love for you to tell our audience more about this casting process. Fascinates the heck out of me. I want you to share why casting, how casting, why does it matter, and how does it create great CX?
Yeah, I don't think it's casting on its own is really new. Disney already does it for decades, of course, and many other companies. But what we did is really, let's start with the blueprint first. You already mentioned it. Is if you have a one-pager on which you summarize what's your purpose, what's your identity, what in essence do you deliver, how do you do it? Signing goals with the golden circle. We already applied that contextual approach since 2000, but expand it with, how do you want to be experienced, and what interactions would lead to that experience, and then what culture and leadership would help build those, would stimulate those behaviors. Now, here's the thing. If you know what interactions you're looking for instance, if you want to be, as a brand, you want to be surprising, or you want to be stimulating or energizing or connecting, doesn't really matter. Then how about finding people who are naturally surprising or naturally stimulating or naturally connecting? And if you then have leadership that lets people be themselves, they will be surprising and stimulating and connecting. It's really no rocket science. So when we do casting, we always start with a blueprint. So essence of the brand. and then find people who have the ultimate match with the blueprints, with the behaviors that we actually want to see in reality, because they trigger the experiences we want customers to have. And then there are different ways to do the casting. We've done it online, we've done it offline, we've created mass events. There are also all kinds of tests that you can apply. But most important is that I think in many cases you step away from let's hire for experience or let's hire for CV or resume. Guys, let's hire for personality and for behavior. I mean, we work with clients, for instance, in hotel business that have one, maybe out of the entire hotel, one, maybe two with a hotel background, and all the others have a perfect match with the blueprint, but never worked in a hotel before.
It gets at that spirit of, hire happy people, teach the skills, that aspect of it. It is. What I like about what you've said there and introduced is the idea of starting with the experience blueprint. While it's harder for a company and there's work to get to that experience blueprint, and thank God for companies like yours, Start Reviews, to Start Reverse, to get the blueprint in place. But once you have that blueprint, then hiring becomes, I'm going to be a little bit overstated here, right? It's the Texan in me, I exaggerate, but becomes easier. You're looking for that personality type. You're looking for that human skill. And then later teaching those hospitality, how to manage a check-in, how to manage a customer complaint, all those kind of things can be taught. But to be surprising, to be curious, those are the things that get teased out really well in the casting process. You do say that it's been done before, and yes, Disney and others, but I got to tell you, it's still very uncommon. It's an approach that I'd love to see more companies do. And I imagine the reason they're not doing it is because they haven't gotten that blueprint first. They don't know the experience and then trickling down backwards. So starting with that blueprint is important. Now, so we've got the right people on board. We've selected them. They've gone through the super cool casting process. How do we then build that level of engagement? Because they're in the door, but how do we keep them engaged? How do we continue that engagement to create that great human CX?
Yeah, a wonderful question, Rick. And we have a reverse people journey, of course. So that starts with attract the right people, then cast. So attract for the casting, you cast them. And the next step is really to immerse them. Because it's unfair to expect, if they haven't got the right retail background or automotive or hospitality background, you hire for personality. I mean, they superstar during the casting, but they need to be set up for success. So the whole immersion is twofold. It's first of all, really get the brand and understand my role. Second is equip me with the skills and the tools that I need to be successful. So the immersion really is about inverting the org charts and empowering the front line to be in the leads. They are the number one, let's say, employee of importance for customers. So they need to be empowered. So from attract to cast to immerse, and then we go on to grow. So we keep giving them impulses, ideally more and more via mobile learning. So they get like learning snacks, 30 seconds, 60 seconds per day. So they keep learning on a very playful way. And then, of course, the next step would be recognize and sustain.
Yeah.
So that would be instead of hiring to firing, which is the traditional HR
so dark,
journey,
but yes.
we do it the other way.
I like that. And it's something that won't be caught on the audio aspect of this is the visual that you described of effectively the upside down org chart. And so listeners, imagine that the V or the pyramid that you're used to seeing, Andre with his hands was doing the reverse of that. So imagine an upside down triangle. And that idea of the upside down org chart, I think visually is so impactful. I've used that at clients before, putting what is traditionally the quote leader at the bottom, and then amplifying the fact that it is your front line that is the most impactful to the customer. And so equipping that it is not that they are being directed or led, of course, but directed or dictated to, but rather supported by a leadership to help them deliver that top line delight for the customer.
Exactly. And you know what, Rick, if you look at reality, you see very often managers that are frustrated that their supervisors are not coaching enough.
Yeah.
And then I think, well, if you call them supervisors, they will probably supervise, right?
Yeah.
So why don't you put them on second? So you put your frontliners on
Mhm.
one, your coaches on two, and call them coaches.
Yes.
Because if you call them coaches, they will start coaching.
It is. You actually, so I'll speak to a brand that I've consulted for and even talked to on this episode, Hilton. In their reservations and contact center, they call their leaders at that level development coaches. And it is a
Cool.
purposeful choice that these are not team leads. Yes, there's the team leads, as all of us want to think sort of universally across industries, but they are there to develop and coach the agents. And I love that approach to that. So I love that you're bringing that up. And it is interesting. Words have impact. I think that's something that brands and companies understate, or maybe those that live in the marketing, the creative spaces state it well, but those outside of it don't realize words, titles, those choices have an impact. And if you designate someone as a supervisor, they'll behave that way. If you designate someone as a development coach, they're more inclined to develop or to be that way.
Totally.
And I'm going to pivot us here, because one of the things that I admire about you is your approach to the globe. And it is a very true statement that when you and I were planning to talk about this, you were literally crossing borders as we were talking. You were in a car and you were crossing across borders. Even in before we hit record here, you were talking about, hey, I may have to bip over to Switzerland to go visit a client. So you have this incredible global approach, which obviously appeals to me. How has travel changed your approach to customer experience?
Interesting question. I think doing so much work across the globe in different continents taught me a very simple lesson. That is that we're not as different as we tend to think we are. At the end of the day, we all like to have, let's say almost all like to have attention. So as soon as you put somebody really on stage as a customer and you give them your attention, and it shouldn't be flattery, but really have a deep interest, sincere interest, whether you're in India, in China, in Japan, South America, North America, Europe, Australia, you name it. I mean, South Africa, we've done projects in Ghana, Tanzania, Zanzibar. I'm not saying it's all the same. I mean, the cues are different, but in essence, we're all human beings. And I mean, I'm not saying it's super simple, but we very often tend to overcomplicate things. If I'm looking at, for instance, we get brands approaching us and with the question, can you help us bring our brand to life? So, well, what's wrong? Well, it's not alive. And then I look at the guides and I think, yeah, but no wonder. I mean, I don't understand. This is corporate or marketing mumbo jumbo. And I have a marketing degree. I studied economics. So if I really read it, I get it. But I've also been a waiter and a receptionist, and I've been a general manager. And in none of those positions, so what do you want me to do? It's too complicated. And I very often refer to corporates with all respect, what they're living the three C's. They always want to be complete, and they always want to be correct, and as a result, make it complex. And if you travel and you see countries, for instance, Vietnam, which is one of my favorite environments. I mean, lovely people, so colorful in many ways. And their hospitality delivery, it's still very simple. And then when I think back working, and you mentioned Hilton before, working at Hilton in this was before World War II. No,
come on now.
No, seriously, 1985. Yeah. Okay. So a long time ago. But we had close to 1,000 standards for just front office alone. And then in retrospect, of course, I'm thinking, what were we thinking? Because you overcomplicate stuff. And that's where again, the beauty and the power of the blueprint sits. That blueprint approach, Rick, has worked in every continent.
Andre, you rattled off a list of countries that were fascinating. And to think that you've traveled there, that you've been to those regions, clearly you need a rest from time to time. So why don't you join me here in the First Class Lounge? Hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun here and enjoy the relaxation of the lounge. So what is a dream travel location from your past?
Sydney, Australia.
Ah, Sydney. Tell me a little bit why.
I'm a waterman, so I'm from the north of the Netherlands. There's a lot of water. Most of our country is still below sea level.
Yeah.
So maybe that explains it. I don't know. But Sydney, with all the keys, all the water. I mean, I remember my wife and I landed there the first time. We fell in love with the place, and we rerouted our vacation a month of Australia to make sure that we had another week at Sydney.
Oh, wow.
And my dream is to simply go back. Hospitality. I mean, you have keys with like 80 to 100 restaurants in a row and one concept cooler after the other. Melbourne was fantastic. I mean, the whole ocean ride between Melbourne and Sydney was amazing. I love Brisbane. I mean, Australia definitely as a whole, really fantastic. We did we rented a jet, private jet, and we landed on the beach.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's. I mean,
holy cow. Oh, that's awesome.
Super cool.
I can see why that's a dream travel location. I talk to a lot of Australians, and I'm jealous of them. I'm jealous of their culture of wanderlust, but I'm also jealous of the beauty of some of the things you're describing. I hope to, even though it's at least pre-pandemic, was a nonstop flight from DFW to Sydney. I still have not made it there yet. I'm looking forward to it.
But if you do, sometime. Make sure, let me know. Go to Whitsundays.
Okay.
We went to Paradise Islands, and it's like what the title says. It's Paradise Islands.
Okay, I'm gonna have to dedicate a month, 6 months, a year of my life to travel there with all the recommendations. It sounds like a wonderful place. So if that's a fantasy of mine, fantasy of yours, what's a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
Oh, that's a good one. North Pole, I guess.
Oh, okay, that's a new one. No one has said North Pole yet. Tell me why. I like that.
Yeah, because it's so different, and it's probably bloody cold. That's one of the reasons we've been there. So I've been to Iceland, I've been to Lapland, all the way, let's say, very up north in both Norway and Finland, but haven't been more north. And I mean, if you go to Lapland, it's not like minus 43 centigrade when we did our session. But then you already get a feel for the pole, I guess. I don't know, but I thought it was amazing. And I mean, going outside with the team and do a team building exercise, and you see that the when people are breathing, you see the ice crystals shaping in the nose.
Oh gosh!
On all the participants. Yeah, I love that. Maybe I'm crazy. I probably am, but I love that.
Andre, you and I are very, very similar, but very, very different. You were talking to a Texan. I grew up in Austin, Texas. I am much more, I'll speak in Fahrenheit. I'm poor at my centigrade conversions, but I'm much more comfortable at 105 Fahrenheit than I am at 65 Fahrenheit, much less some of the numbers you're describing. Those, I would just curl up and die. I just couldn't handle it, but it is a, the beauty of diversity, even in our own desires of dream travel locations. So thinking back to travel and food and how food is such a key part of travel, what is a favorite thing of yours to eat?
That's very easy. Sushi. You can wake me up for sushi, sashimi. We had a month's vacation in Japan, and I had a number of business trips there. You can, both of my daughters and myself, you can wake us up for sushi. My wife probably, she could handle once a week, but not more. But you could serve 2 meals per day, sushi, sashimi.
Love it. Big fan of sushi myself. Not sure I could do 2x per day, but who knows? I mean, maybe give it a shot sometime. So what's the opposite side? What is a thing your parents forced you to eat, but you hated as a kid?
Oh, oatmeal.
Oatmeal. Okay.
Yeah. And I still do hate it. Sincerely.
Oh, this is one of my favorite portions because the wide range. Oatmeal's a new one for me. North Pole's a new one for me. I've heard the usuals: vegetables, Brussels sprouts, tomatoes, but oatmeal's a first. So now you've traveled all over the world. You've traveled a ton, not including your phone, not including your passport. What is one travel item you will not leave home without?
Sounds not my phone. You said. No,
yeah.
An item, so it's not like wife, kids.
Yeah, I figured you'd like to travel with them. An item.
Yeah. I pass. I mean, I need my phone to make videos and pictures. So it's not to call, if that's what it is. So I used to have like a Canon with massive lenses, and now I have this new iPhone, and the quality of camera is amazing. I mean, in our hallway, we have like a huge collage of pictures from our safari in Tanzania and Zanzibar, all shots with the iPhone. So if I'd say I wouldn't leave home with the camera on the iPhone, then that's the item I would choose.
Andre, we'll let that answer slide because it's not technically the phone. It's not researching data. It is, in fact, the phone, the camera on there, and it is stunning. Some of the pictures. I do a Saturday nature post when I can get around to it, and just a little quick snap of the iPhone, and it's stunning what can be pulled off. Now, those who have real photography talents, you can see the difference between amateurs like me and the trues, but it is fascinating how beautiful that is. One of the things, and actually it reminds me of something, some of the most beautiful experiences that I've had was on one of the most unique experiences that I've been a part of. And it was with your company when we were outside in the countryside in the Netherlands. And I know we've all been a part of this kind of meh business retreat, right? We go to a conference room or a hotel, we get a bunch of Post-its and markers, and then we think we're creative, we develop a new idea, and then return back to our normal way of thinking right after this business retreat is over. But this experience that I had with you and your company shows me that's not how you approach it. It is one of the most impactful business moments I've been a part of. I really want you to talk to us about Compass. Tell me about the Compass process.
So the compass or roadmap or blueprints, I don't really mind. We're not hung up to the name. What is more important, that it's a one-pager. KLM calls it a compass. Radisson calls it a roadmap. Many companies call it the blueprint. But what is important is that it's a one-pager that is co-created. And we've done that together during that trip. And it's containing two parts. One is purpose, identity, what and how of your essence of delivery. And the other part is the experience part. So how do you want to be experienced in 4 boxes? And then each box translated into what do we need to do in order to bring that experience to life. So what are the 4 behaviors or interactions we need on, let's say, employee or channel level? And then what culture and leadership drives those behaviors. Once you got that compass, then basically everything else becomes more clear, because then you can say, so if we talk about leadership, and that's what we did, if, for instance, leadership needs to be empowering, inspiring, energizing, and setting up for success, for instance, for coaching, then once we do a leadership intervention, we should make sure that every leader experiences those 4 behaviors themselves as well. Hence, we went into the dunes, into the forest. We created, I remember, totem poles. You remember?
Yeah.
So we had a complete, of course, yes, there are, let's say, elements, theory, models, but we put those, and you remember, we put those on a card that you can bring into, for instance, a nature trail. And by making sure that you keep moving from one scene to the other, the movement is already instrumental, because that's what we want. We want people to transform. We want people to move. And sitting in a room, it's not the same.
And I want to amplify that visually. So I to make sure that our listeners are hearing this, what we did is we left that room, and none of us knew this ahead of time. And to call it a nature hike would be grossly understating this. We got out in a national forest and wandered, and even that transition, and you had set it up, and your team had set it up that there were various posts along the way where we stopped and had discussions or brainstorming, those kind of stuff. And the walk itself, the conversations that were happening on the walk, or the thoughts that were being generated by the walk, being out in nature, being mobile, those sorts of things. There were some real and raw stories that were shared. There were tears that were being shed. This was a near religious experience, almost, in a corporate environment. What is it about that experience? How did you come about choosing that as a way to really unlock those business leadership moments in the Compass development?
Yeah, well, some call it's the most impactful therapy they ever had. And I think, it's not really meant to be therapy, but of course it's context. And if you, rather than say, you talk about topics like strategy, you talk about action planning, you first need to really come together as a team. And you can only connect with the team if you first connect with yourself. So what we do is make it a sort of a series of reflections. How did I become the leader that I currently am? So where do I come from? Where am I going? What's my ambition? But more important, what's my destination? What do I want to leave behind? And you remember those were questions. And then we have, let's say, the cards with a number of questions you may choose to answer. You can also find your own answers. But doing this deep dive during, let's say, 2 days, this was 2 days before we went into the planning part. Mm-hmm. So it's a 2 days timeout. So connection with self, connection with team, connection with strategy. It's a natural evolution into a sort of a next level orientation, rather than just looking at, so where are we now? Where do we want to go? What's the gap? And how do we close that? It's too simple, because just like you said, if we don't do this deep dive, this introspection, if we don't do it, then people after 3 days will look back, these were fun days. And I mean, we probably within weeks or days, not forget about it, but we won't have any change. And then it's a waste of time.
It was just a really expensive trip for leaders to get away. Andre, I'm talking about something that is, I've lost track of the years, 3 or 4 years ago, and it still is that meaningful, impactful. And there are things that we talked about and changed and discussed that are still actions that I do today. So absolutely deep truth in that approach. So for companies, for people that want to know more about this, how can they get in touch with you? Your world is intriguing, and I imagine there's listeners that are going to be saying, I want to know more about this. How should people get in touch with you?
With me, via Instagram, via the website, LinkedIn, Facebook, or just call me. Feel free, Rick, to share my details. Happy to listen, happy to learn, and happy to build where we can.
Brilliant. Well, I will get those details in the show notes for sure. Andre, you have once again taken me on a journey that I didn't expect. There were things I thought we'd talk about. There are things that I didn't think we'd talk about. I certainly didn't expect that the North Pole would be your dream destination, and that will always now sit as a memory with me. It's been brilliant talking about Start Reverse, talking about casting, talking about this great process that ultimately builds into a blueprint, into a compass. It's meaningful, it's impactful, and I'm so glad that you've created this approach that we can talk about and that I've had the chance to experience. Andre, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me on CX Passport today. I wish you the best, man. Safe travels.
And let's connect soon again, Rick, and have fun on a very cool journey. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. Make sure to visit our website, cxpassport.com, where you can hit subscribe so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, you can check out the rest of the EX for CX website. If you're looking to get real about customer experience, EX for CX is available to help you increase revenue by starting to listen to your customers and create great experiences for every customer, every time. Thanks for listening to CX Passport, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.